My husband is dead. Well, my mother-in-law's now showing up saying she's going to give me an ultimatum. Either I vacate the premises of the house that I've lived in for a long time with my late husband, or else she's going to do something absolutely unforgivable, and I don't know what she's planning to do. But I know one thing. I have the papers that prove I own this house. I've spent years lurking on the Just Know threads and other subs, and while I've always related and always wanted to tell my own story, I never did because I never wanted to risk someone finding it out and connecting it to me and making my husband deal with the fallout. Earlier today was my husband's funeral. I no longer have that concern, but I do have a new story. My mother-in-law and I have never gotten along, but it goes even deeper than that. My husband and my mother-in-law have never gotten along either. Dean, which is actually his real name because at this point I'm hoping that someone in my mother-in-law's family finds this and is finally willing to see the kind of woman she truly is, who was raised in a very traditional house. They weren't always religious, but they always believed in the sanctity of womanly and manly duties, respectively. Women kept to the house, they tended to the home and the children, and men were the providers. They worked outside the house and were the head of the family unit. The girls wore skirts and the boys wore pants. The boys went to school and the girls packed their lunch. Their faith depended on the whims of my father-in-law, who, according to my husband, was actually a decent guy. All things considered, when father-in-law was around, mother-in-law was calm, and so the household was calm. Everything worked as it should. When father-in-law was gone, be it a business trip or a fishing trip with the guys, mother-in-law would start to unravel. It all worked out throughout Dean's childhood because father-in-law was rarely gone. When Dean was in college, father-in-law passed away. Thankfully, through a combination of life insurance and marital assets, the family inheritance as well, mother-in-law and their 6 children were okay. Dean was the youngest of the bunch and the only boy, so father-in-law and mother-in-law had saved a college fund for him from the moment he was conceived, so his education just remained unaffected. Though he missed his dad and worried for his sister, he felt no pity for mother-in-law. She was smothering of a presence in his life and tampered with only by the interference of father-in-law. The only reason Dean was in college so far away from home was to simply get away from mother-in-law. Every aspect of his life was micromanaged by her, and she was given the chance, so getting away from school was really his first taste of freedom. To quickly touch on his sisters, though, the only ones relevant to the story are Anne and Michelle. Anne being the oldest of the 6 children and Michelle being the second. Anne was born to test mother-in-law. When she was told that girls were polite, she became anything but that. When she was told that girls don't play sports, she got herself an athletic scholarship. Michelle is what mother-in-law calls God's apology for Anne, the perfect traditional daughter, because Michelle married at 19 and had her first child that same year. She lives close to home and runs her own household up to mother-in-law standards. Anne, as the oldest daughter, practically raised her siblings, while Michelle spent her whole life chasing after mother-in-law's approval. The rest of Dean's sisters and Dean himself aligned himself more with Anne's point of view. I credit Anne almost entirely for the fact that Dean was a functioning human being who did not think that women belonged in the kitchen and anywhere else. Thanks to Anne's influence, each of the sisters, with the exception of Michelle, actually ended up pursuing territory education and joining the workforce instead of staying barefoot and pregnant straight out of high school. Each of them has done quite well for themselves. Thanks to the fact that Anne was somehow a competent caretaker for all of her siblings, they were all surprisingly close. When father-in-law passed, they all made sure that despite their individual emotions surrounding mother-in-law and the way that she raised them, she was supported and would be okay. Through this, they actually ended up growing close to even Michelle, who until then had remained mother-in-law's golden child above the others. Above the other girls, at least, and Dean would always be mother-in-law's precious baby boy, and even he went out of his way to make sure that his family was okay following his father's death, despite his misgivings towards his mom. I met Dean shortly after college. We worked in a similar field and connected at networking events that both of us had been forced into by our colleagues. We clicked instantly, And seeing us both, and we're new to the area, we ended up hanging out a lot. Fast forward 2 years and we're tying the knot in an intimate ceremony in the city we lived in. As you probably guessed it, mother-in-law did not like me. From the moment we met, I was too modern, too feminist, I had no values, I wore clothes that were too tight or too short or too revealing, I didn't have any proper feminine hobbies, and I had no interest in being a homemaker to children that her son and I didn't even want. It was a cold war from the jump, and Dean and I very quickly decided that if we were going to make things work, he would handle his family and I would handle mine. Aside from my mother-in-law, his sisters and I got along great, not including Michelle, of course, who parroted all mother-in-law's complaints, and I never met father-in-law, and from what I've heard about him from Dean's sisters, I'm almost glad I didn't. But I did get to meet and get along with Dean's extended family. It seems that outside of mother-in-law and select aunts and uncles, I fit right inside with the family pretty good. He never had any problem with mine, thankfully, and my parents loved him, and the love definitely went both ways, and my little brother loved having a brand new older brother to talk gaming with. For his part, Dean loved having a mother figure who did not want to control every single aspect of his life. And finally, having brothers was definitely a plus. We had a happy marriage. We loved each other, we were both on the same page about not wanting to have any children, and so we lived happy as dinks. Dual income, no kids dinks. We traveled often, we ate good food, and we had fun date nights, and I found my life partner, and you know what? I was so happy. 10 days ago, Dean was in an accident. A driver, high on 3 separate substances, ran him off the road and killed both of them. Both cars were wrecked and half of his body was mangled beyond recognition. In one moment, my life went from everything I've ever dreamt of to a nightmare beyond my comprehension. My husband is gone. I had to make the call to his sisters, and I had to call Anne from the hospital and tell her that her brother was gone. Then I did it again. Then again. Then by the time I was done speaking to his youngest sister, his other sisters had taken on the burden of telling everyone else. I watched the doctor sign his death certificate, and I started planning the funeral. I know you guys might think that I might not seem mourning of my husband's death because it's been only 10 days, and here I am posting about my evil mother-in-law, and my tone doesn't seem mournful about my husband's death, but that's not the case. The past 10 days have been extremely emotionally traumatic for me. Mother-in-law is only worsening the situation, so let's go ahead and get to the backstory. In an hour, everyone who was close enough was in the hospital with me. Mother-in-law was not there. I learned later that Michelle was at her house comforting her because she had nearly collapsed after hearing the news. I was grateful that they weren't here, though. In the 2 weeks leading up to the funeral, which may seem like a long time, there were things that needed to be handled before we could go through with it, and 10 days is closer to a week anyways. I didn't get to see mother-in-law at all. No one called, no one texted, nothing. Every single member of Dean's family, extended or otherwise, got in contact with me in some way just to express their condolences and offer their help in whatever way I may need. But it was radio silent from his mom. In fact, we never spoke outside of civil greetings at family gatherings and the occasional lecture at dinner on how I should help more in the kitchen. The deal was that I would handle my family and Dean would handle his conflict. If that meant that mother-in-law and I never spoke, then so be it. Still, most would consider the death of their son reason enough to break the silence, and I tried to call her a few times. She never answered. Not in a maybe she's away from her phone type of way, but in a she definitely declined the call after one ring type of way. So I stopped calling. My husband had just passed away. She knew exactly what it felt like. That brings us to today. This morning was Dean's funeral. Obviously his whole family attended, and obviously his mother was there. Any opinions that she had about the funeral had been filtered through Michelle, so I'm sure it was up to her standards. We did not exchange any words until the burial, where, in front of every single member of both of our families, she blamed me for his death. She berated me for not being a good enough wife to him, that he would be out on the road, coming home from dinner because I had not prepared something for him. He'd been on his way back from work, but he stopped to get takeout from our favorite Indian spot. The last time I spoke to him was to remind him not to get the spiciest curry again. She told me that he died because I was a bad wife. In any normal circumstances, I would not have given what she said a thought. Mother-in-law was being mother-in-law, and I didn't care what she had to say. On the day of my husband's funeral, however, with his body not even yet covered in dirt, I didn't take it. I couldn't take it. I broke down in front of everyone and cried so loud as she continued to berate me for every single thing I've done and failed to do to be worthy of her son. Every perceived shortcoming, every feminist slight against her, everything. She went on and on and on, as everybody froze, because not only had no one ever seen me cry to the extent I was bawling, but nobody knew how to react to a woman who had just lost her son, losing her temper at the funeral. You know what? I don't blame them. But I will forever be grateful to my little brothers, who stepped in to block her view of me, and to Anne, who immediately marched her out of view. The funeral went on. We buried Dean, and I don't know what to do now. Every single one of his sisters has contacted me to apologize for their mother's behavior and to check in on me, except, of course, Michelle, who tried to call me and then left me a series of text messages berating me for causing her mother so much stress on the day of her son's funeral. There's nothing for you to really do with this information. There's no advice that anybody can give me that I haven't already heard, and there's not really a pep talk that's going to make me feel better about losing Dean. I just wanted to get it out. Oh, well. Do something with this experience that isn't sitting here and stewing in it alone. Now, I guess we can stew together. You're welcome. I really don't want any advice or condolences right now. Just thank you for reading this far. I hope your life is a lot better than mine. Update number 1. Hey guys, it's been only a day since my original post, and even I wasn't expecting to have an update so soon. In all honesty with you guys, I wasn't planning on ever updating my post again. I was using it as a way to vent out everything I was feeling and going through yesterday, and I did not even expect to gain any traction from it. The sheer volume of direct messages I received since posting it has proved wrong. In any case, I do have an update, and it's almost more infuriating that what led me to the post in the first place. I'm, however, very grateful that people actually took the time to engage with my post. Some of you shared some very touching stories of your own losses and what you went through after them, and reading through those comments and messages has been about as therapeutic as posting my story can be. Thank you. And for those of you asking, I'm 33. My husband was 32. His sisters that I mentioned were 43 and 41, respectively, with Anne being the eldest of his sister. Mother-in-law is somewhere in her 60s. Okay, on to the actual update. I was hoping that following the funeral, mother-in-law would return to her radio silence and I could begin to rebuild my life in peace. Unfortunately, she had other plans. First, we should address the radio silence. Apparently, Anne and her lovely sisters, again excluding Michelle, have been running interference over the last 2 weeks since Dean's passing to make sure that mother-in-law does not stress me out before the funeral. Evidently, Anne was the one who hung up every time I called mother-in-law to make sure that she would not be able to cause any drama with me. I'm beyond grateful, but evidently they could not hold mother-in-law back forever. She showed up at my house, uninvited, obviously, and alone. Her neighbors had driven her over and was very conspicuously waiting in her car outside of my house, but she did not otherwise involve herself. Mother-in-law had decided to turn up at my house at 8 in the morning to have a chit-chat. Apparently, her definition of talking is banging on my door until I wake up the day after my husband's funeral and demanding that I vacate the house immediately. Well, obviously, I'm confused. Why on earth would I leave my own house? Fortunately for me, mother-in-law was more than willing to clear up the confusion and inform me that my husband had actually purchased the house for her, and now that he's gone, it's her home, and she doesn't want me living here. I think that it goes without saying that none of that's true, but if I have to say it, none of that is true. Dean and I purchased the house together. Using money from the sale of my premarital apartment for the down payment, it's very much my home. It is in no way hers at all, and guys, now I'm explaining this rationally and clearly because none of you are currently yelling at the top of your lungs and cutting me off. I was able to make no such explanation to mother-in-law as she was doing exactly that. At no point in this conversation did I invite mother-in-law into my home, so all of this occurred on my doorstep within hearing range of any of my neighbors who may have been up and nosy at the time. Once we reached the 10-minute mark of mother-in-law's insistent yelling, I exited the house, shut the door so she couldn't get in, walked over to her car, and told them to either take her home or I would call her daughter to come and fetch her. I then walked straight past the still yelling mother-in-law back into my own house and shut the door in her face. Mercifully, she left after about 5 more minutes, and I assume her neighbors somehow got her back into the car. I've since spoken to Anne about what happened, which is how I found out about her running interference in the days leading up to the funeral, and I want nothing more to do with it all. Hopefully, her daughters can handle this because as far as I'm concerned, this is not my job to do that. Update number 2. Well, surprise, 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 mother-in-law came back, but this time the dutiful neighbor accompanied her to the door. Oh, how kind of her. How kind of her. I need to invest in one of those video doorbells that I can use to see who's knocking at the door before answering it blindly. It's just landing me in more of these interactions. Today, mother-in-law came prepared with a bright blue bifold folder holding a neat stack of papers. Papers that, according to her, proved that she owned my house. Of course, she refused to let me handle the folder and anyway, as she was concerned that I would damage them or otherwise tamper. But if I was willing to listen to her, she would be more than willing to bring me my own photocopied set. Well, I did get a glance at the papers when she leafed through them to show them off, and from what I can tell, they do look like proper legal documents, but pretty much anything written in a particular format justifies looking like a legal document. My faith in her words is further lessened by the fact that I know she doesn't own my home. As far as I know, one owner of a shared asset cannot give the entirety of a property to someone else. Dean might have been able to leave mother-in-law his half of the house in the will, but he didn't. He left everything to me. Even if he had not, I'm pretty sure that our prenup would not allow him to give mother-in-law the house anyways. Unfortunately, none of this got through to mother-in-law, who firmly believed that Dean had not only left the house to her, but that he had in fact purchased it for her. It was actually never my house or even Dean's house. It was just her house that he bought for her, and that she was allowing us to live in until she wanted to live in it herself. Generously, she had wanted her son to live in a good home, in a good neighborhood, and she had never asked to move in, and now that she was gone, she wanted the house. I'm genuinely at a loss. It's not her house. There's no way that this is her home. The only inconvenience is that Dean looked after all of our important documents, so it'll take me a while to find the relevant documents to prove it. But this is my home. I'm 100% certain that Dean did not secretly sign away to his toxic mother our house. Well, Anne completely believes me. Any reasonable person completely believes me, and mother-in-law is not a reasonable person. She went so far as to tell me that if I wasn't out of the house by the end of the week, she'd be calling the cops. Fine, go ahead. Call the cops. They're not going to do anything because they can't kick me out of my own home. At this point, I'm not even worried. I'm just annoyed that I have to deal with this again. Once again, I hope that one of her daughters is able to knock some sense into her soon, because I'm quickly approaching my wit's end. Update number 3. She keyed my car. I can't prove it because, as I said in my last update, I really need to get those video doorbell camera things. But I'm sure that it was her, and I cannot believe that my mother-in-law just did this. What kind of psychopathic grown woman? Oh, really? More of an elderly woman at this point, but keys their daughter-in-law's car? It's the only vehicle I currently have because if you remember from my original post, my husband passed away in a car accident. Fun fact, he was driving my car. So, mother-in-law actually keyed her own late son's car. I'm beyond angry. I'm infuriated. Maybe it was the first thing that she did. I would be an emotional wreck at the time. Maybe I'd be sobbing uncontrollably again, like when she decided to berate me at Dean's funeral. At this point, I'm beyond tears. She keyed my car. She keyed Dean's car. I don't have proof. I don't have video, but I'm certain that it was her and that I'm willing to go nuclear for this. I'll be taking this to the police the moment the sun comes up tomorrow, since I have the pleasure of finding my car like this upon returning from my own mother's house. Even my brother, who was dropping me off, and hasn't overly interacted ever with mother-in-law on a handful of occasions maybe, even he is convinced that it was her. I'll be calling Anne in the morning, after I speak to the police. I don't want any chances of this getting out before I have the authorities involved. I've taken pictures, and my brother and I will be going to the station first thing in the morning, with our suspicion. Maybe they won't find anything, but maybe they will. How dare she? I'm absolutely fuming as I write this update, and I've already had a few hours to calm down. How dare she preach the importance of family values, and how dare her son was to her then come to his marital home and vandalize his property. He loved that damn car, and I bet she didn't even know it, because she never even bothered to know a thing about him beyond what she thought that he should like. All I want to do right now is get in the car and drive it through her stupid home. Maybe I'm overreacting, maybe I'm jumping to conclusions, maybe I'm assigning guilt with no proof or evidence whatsoever. I don't care even a little bit. Every single ounce of care that I have in me has been bled out drop by her and her horrible attitude since the funeral. Her son's dead. My husband's dead, and she has nothing better to do with her time but harass his wife and key his dang car. I will not rest, I will not sleep, until something is finally done about this, and if I have to tear her whole life apart, well, so be it. Update number 4. With everything in me, I hope that this is the final update that I'll ever make. What started out as a short venting session about my mother-in-law, now that my husband isn't around to suffer the consequences of it, was blown into a full-blown family meltdown. I have no regrets, but I'm done. To sum up everything that's happened since my last update, the house is definitely mine. I'm pressing charges against mother-in-law, and she's admitted to the hospital for high blood pressure. Let's break down a few things, shall we? While I lamented my lack of security cameras, particularly of the doorbell variety, and 2 of my previous updates, my neighbors fortunately do not suffer the same fate. In fact, the neighbors who live across the street from me informed me the very next day that not only did she have a Ring doorbell, but she had a very interesting video to show me. Within half an hour, and over a steaming cup of coffee, I had proof of mother-in-law keying my car to take to the police. I did. But since I now had the video in my possession with no chance of her being able to deny it, I decided to give my sister-in-law a call. I informed them that I would be going over to mother-in-law's house to discuss the ownership of my home. I would so appreciate some chaperones to make sure that nothing gets out of hand. And a witness, of course, but that was left unsaid. Michelle was already dutifully with her mother, so when I arrived with Anne and another one of Dean's sisters, it was a little family reunion. Since my last update, I've also taken the trouble to relocate to a relevant document regarding the ownership of my home. I made some photocopies and got a bifold of my own, and popped right down onto mother-in-law's house for a visit. I decided to start with the keying of the car first because once everybody was settled into the sitting room, I presented my laptop and the footage of mother-in-law artfully carved into Dean's car. Even Michelle was horrified and could not defend her mother, which was a first. I informed mother-in-law that I would be taking the footage to the police and filing a report, as I can't make a claim with my insurance to get the damage fixed otherwise. She began to protest, but I glossed past it and asked her if she herself had been in contact with the police. After all, she had told me that she would be calling the cops if I did not move out by the end of the week. None of her daughters, other than Anne, were aware of what she had been trying to pull, or the ownership of the house. All of them were confused while she triumphantly pulled out her folder to show me her ownership document, which consisted of the same single sheet of paper saying Dean was buying the house for her. This time, after getting a good look at it, I recognized the paper. Dean had sent it to her when we were buying a house to get her to stop badgering him about buying a home. It was a thoughtlessly typed out Word document to get her to shut up that had absolutely no legal power whatsoever. It wasn't even signed. I told mother-in-law as much and then presented the actual documents that I brought along. She starts to hyperventilate and had to sit back, demanding that Michelle brings her some water and everybody gives her space. Within moments of being shown the documents, she passes out. For those of you who are actually worried, she's fine. Anne and Michelle took her to the hospital as she just had a bit of a flare-up of hypertension. Otherwise, that's it. That's the end of the story, and the house is mine. I'm filing a police report against her for keying my car, and she has high blood pressure. That's the end. Thank you for reading this far, if you did. And thank you again for all the support. I hope I never update again. But let me know. Would you press charges? I think the craziest part about this story is the fact that if OP's neighbor did not catch the car being keyed on that door ring bell camera, then there's no telling if OP would have ever even been able to pin this on mother-in-law, or the fact that she has now evidence against it. But I don't know. I want to know everybody's opinion. What you would do in this situation. You're here trying to grieve your lost husband, and here's your mother-in-law making the wildest scene in front of everyone simply because she doesn't really like you. And I don't know. This seems like a horrible position to be in. Anyways, guys, drop your thoughts down below. If you've ever been in a situation like this, let's discuss it. My name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories like this every single day. And if you guys want to be a part of these daily internet readings, go ahead, subscribe to the channel, have a fantastic day. I'll see you tomorrow, and of course remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.